All right, let's call this, city council work session, to order, please, for Tuesday, September 22nd. Roll call, please.
Crawford. Here. Klaus.
Here.
Pat.
Here.
Martino.
Here.
Dyke.
Here.
Hardy.
Here.
Haley.
Here. All right, first item, yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So, going to cover the first two items relatively quickly. Just want to provide some updates specific to utilization of CARES Act funding for the city and for financial impact of COVID-19. So as talked about in a couple previous meetings, part of the CARES Act included disbursements to municipalities. So far, we've received two distributions. You can see on the information sheet from the finance director what the detail on those disbursements have been to date. First one at $140,000, second one at $70,000. Purpose of these funds is really to offset mitigation costs relative to municipalities' impacts and fight against the spread of coronavirus. So what we've done is basically highlight the existing uses by category in the first, and then as you go down the rest of the table, it's basically shown in a little bit more detail. What we wanted to get feedback from the council on tonight, we provide a few updates. First off, we talked about the regulatory deadlines that we have to hit. We have till October 15th to officially encumber these funds, basically dedicate them towards uses, and then have the funds actually expended by the end of the year. Right now, basically, we're waiting on final guidance from the state on what we call the third disbursement, and you can see we have it in here as anticipated, as it seems that all the support and all the work coming from the State House is a go on this. It just hasn't been finalized. At this point in time, if we're to get that third wave, it's an anticipated $247,000 in addition to what's been received on the first two. We don't have final word or detail on allowable use and or regulatory deadlines on the third phase, but we're just conservatively anticipating the regulations on spending will be roughly the same as the first two waves, and that the timing will likely be the same as well, but there may be a little bit of a month grace period for that third phase. So as you go down the list there, and you see what we spent to date, what's anticipated as part of the second wave, and then if we were to get the third wave, these are basically a couple different plans that we've done in concert with the rest of the departments, trying to meet all the needs that we ran into this year. The biggest thing I want to highlight is on the personnel cost, and you'll see kind of the way it's highlighted within the first and second anticipation. Basically, what we've done in memo provided to council in terms of the allocation of breakdown of cost, what we've done is gone through all of our budgeted full-time personnel within certain departments that were greatly impacted, not from a revenue standpoint, but from an operations standpoint, the COVID-19 type mitigation efforts. So you think public safety immediately. And also the Parks and Recreation Department's been largely impacted in terms of trying to keep public spaces safe, trying to keep them clean, and a lot of efforts up front in terms of planning to ensure proper social distancing, et cetera, at all of our parks and what programming we did have this summer. So what we've done is gone through an allocation cost to essentially reallocate funding from the typical funding sources, so from their operational accounts, and subsidize those through additions from the CARES Act funding. So I don't want to give the impression that these are anticipated or additional personnel costs. These are things that are budgeted. These are typical full-time salaries that are paid to employees that were on well before, and part of the approved budget this year is just changing the funding responsibility for those dollars. And so it works on the accounting side. It's kind of an operational offset that helps keep surpluses within the operation accounts for some of those departments. General fund specifically with the police department, fire levy fund for the fire department, and parks and recreation funding for the parks department as well. So I'll have the next. So from there, there's a couple other items, mostly PPE, cleaning supplies. We have incurred some additional services, whether it be cleaning, a couple other technological services. We had a lot of IT costs up front in terms of going to virtual remote work. So those are highlighted. And then there's a couple, I'll say, bigger ticket items that we've worked with. So the fire department, working with them to get some updated, early on, fire department using essentially disposable gallons on a COVID-related call. we've switched to more durable coveralls. It's between just the protocols as a result of COVID-19 and in addition to using those coveralls in the fall, significantly increase utilization of our laundry. And so we're looking to get updated washers and dryers at both our station here, Station 1 and Station 2 of the township. A couple other costs included within there. We are looking at some additional things in the fire department to help separate the guys in terms of there's an opportunity to modify our existing bunk room to help separate. Right now it's kind of shared space, and so an opportunity to keep people separated as best we can while staff. Luckily and thankful to the township, obviously the Station 2 is very new and has a lot of sensors built into it. So we'll be looking at that on our end. We have also in here proposed some modifications to both the finance and zoning window here, and then also to the police department. Again, just in an effort to kind of keep people spaced out, spread apart. Looking at just some modifications to the window and the entrance piece up in the finance area to help, instead of combining people in a confined space right there, to open up that area, provide stacking space for the public, and then also modify the window so that we're not having an open window with things. So going to a little bit more secure window configuration. Same with the police department. Right now it's a lot of shared workspace, and so kind of cleaning things up. There's a lot of different maintenance within the police department in general, and so an opportunity to clean things up a little bit, but also provide some dedicated workspace so that we don't have a lot of shared kind of overlapping shared common spaces amongst the employees within the police department. One of the bigger ticket items on here is actually on tonight's agenda, and it's planned to move forward, assuming the third wave or distribution of CARES Act funding is received. And, we were hopeful, and I think I mentioned in our financial activity report, hopeful we would have had confirmation by now that we'd be receiving that. We have not. We kept it on the agenda in the off chance that we got it as early as today. Ultimately, it's a new financial software package that we've been looking at for a long time. But one of the pieces they've added to is financial planning and just decision-making procedures in terms of forecasting financial impact of COVID-19. And so it's two benefits really on the CARES Act side. One is the better financial decision-making, tracking, reporting, et cetera. Also, it just makes us, in terms of the staff, in the event that if things start to pick up in seriousness this fall, or when we have to go back to virtual remote work or some kind of staggered event, it's cloud-based software, and it helps just to keep us, in terms of the virtual side of things, a little more efficient and operational on the back end. The other thing from just from the city standpoint, it's a government transparency suite, and so basically it's a back end to update all the city's financial aspects, transactions, reports, et cetera, all on the city's website. Creates an electronic budget book. It really streamlines the budgeting process in general. And just to highlight too, one of the positions that we've been kind of missing with the transition of the city manager position was some of the administrative offset I provided for the finance department. And so I'd like to kind of think of this as really as an assistant finance director for a lot cheaper cost than what the typical assistant finance director would cost. So I'll highlight that. I'll talk about that again. And then in the meeting tonight, we have the operational budget to pay for it, but in the event that we don't get the third wave of CARES Act funding, I leave it up to council discretion to get stipulated the approval of that resolution upon authorize my office to execute that upon receipt of that third wave. With that, Corey, I didn't know if you wanted to touch on anything else within here. If anyone has any questions on any of the specific items within this.
Yeah, hey Mike, TWP I assume is township, correct? Two-part question. Is it okay for one government entity to receive money from the state and give it to another one? And the second part, are they getting their own CARES money?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, yes, and the second question, the township is, and so basically we're doing this in coordination with them. So I anticipate we'll give them what that reimbursement number is on the next invoice, and so they'll pay it in the CARES Act fund instead of general fund dollars for them.
Yeah, Joel, what's being approved tonight, or at least through the motion, that memo that Mike has on how much personnel costs can be allocated. So I already talked to the township about it, and what I'm gonna do tomorrow is lay out send them an email with all the support and all the numbers, so they can have support on their end when they distribute that CARES Act funds to us. So it'll actually help them from their general fund side on the next invoice going out. We'll show the differences on the invoices, so that as a government entity, as a township, they can give CARES Act funds to other government entities. They just have to maintain all the support, and I'll provide all that to the township.
And then on dorm room dividers, the total's 6. It says township 50%, but it still says 6. Should that be 3,000?
No, that was my fault. I just noted that before you said something. That's supposed to be 100%
Yeah.
city.
Okay.
100% city.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, it shouldn't be 50% township. That was my fault.
But you said the new building has,
Yeah,
Yes.
yes. And the township built their structure without any funds from the city, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the sheet we got from Corey,
Mm-hmm.
I understand, no, this correlates to the motion that's going on tonight?
So what you'll see in the personnel unemployment line, that's what correlates to the motion tonight, is council officially accepting the determination on my office in terms of the positions and what their COVID-19 related time was.
So is this, maybe I didn't, I want to understand, you said it's going to the department? Or is it a budget? Or is this going to person, each person? Because the way it's written up the motion, you get individuals.
Those positions specifically that are highlighted, just allocating the cost of how we pay for those full-time positions. It's no new additional funding, it's just modifying previously budgeted costs. So say Parks Director or Parks Operations Manager. And the adopted budget is broken out between Parks Director's base and funding allocations, so we'll reduce those funds and then just replace them with CARES Act dollars. But it's no new money, it's just modifying the back-end funding of that to show that that employee had dedicated time towards COVID-19 related activities.
You're just pulling from a different bucket, so you have more in this bucket because you would have paid from here, but you're not, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. With that said, like Corey and I spoke,
Mm-hmm.
it was probably my opinion, I wasn't very. Some of that money the county used,
Yeah.
I was asked about that, so he said, that's pretty something. That would go.
Ultimately, I don't anticipate making any recommendation to council at this point in time for any kind of hazard pay or anything in addition to that. If that's something council would like the administration to explore, happy to do so. That's not my recommendation at this time. I don't anticipate any issues coming up from staff, but so far, all the conversation I've had with our department has that's our plan.
I mean, there was an issue with that going on.
Sure.
Those
Understood.
guys, they still, the article in the paper and all
Understood.
that, and then it's gonna come back. Why are they doing it or not? When we get the money, then it's not obvious.
Yeah, and honestly, the strategy to this point, and we've been fortunate from a financial aspect, and I think I'll lay this out really from the start, is that I feel fortunate enough that we didn't have to make any staffing decisions in the first place. I mean, we maintained full-time roles 100%. We haven't modified anyone's paycheck or had to reduce anything to this standpoint, and we're still in relatively good financial standing, all things considered. Again, if it's a prerogative council would like to explore, happy to do so. Just at this point in time, I feel confident in saying that, you know, the funding allocation that we've done to this point in time, and I think the value out there on the city's behalf to keep all everyone employed without a salary modification.
And I understand that, it wasn't that we, some of it was money's cut, some of it was the people that didn't have the option.
For other type benefits.
Right.
Yeah,
Which was your safety.
correct. Yeah. There's been, yeah, we're happy to look further into it.
so any other comments on that?
Thank you all for the next item. Route 6, proposed lane reduction plan, it's relative to the current phase 1 construction plan. So council has before you updated exhibits that show basically a modified striping plan. Just to give some context and background where we're at today, there's a couple supply chain issues that the contractor's facing that we're likely not going to be able to get, I'll call it permanent striping done this year. Just the way things are playing out, so we'll do temporary striping, which is your typical street thing. The primary or permanent striping that will be put down next spring is actually thermoplastic that they melt onto the road. So we actually need a little bit warmer temperatures. We had the same situation we did the Michigan Love project a few years ago. Personally unnoticeable, and it's just in effect during the winter, and we'll come back next spring to do it. So basically, in mapping out logistics in terms of if there is any desire from the community, from the council to explore the lane reduction plan and inclusion of bike lanes, I think what this does is provide us an opportunity to do what I'll call a trial period. And basically where you could strike what's shown here, which is the quote-unquote road bad plan with the bike lane, utilizing temporary striping, have that in place through the winter and through into early next spring, and use that as an opportunity for the community, for everyone to get a chance to feel the corridor the way it's actually designed to be used. And, understanding not everyone's out riding their bikes in the middle of the winter, and we could look to a date certain next spring to get some opportunities for weather return. So basically, obviously, I want to council the opportunity to speak with the engineers tonight, get some questions answered, and if this is something that's truly desirable, I just provide that as a potential outcome. This isn't a decision that necessarily has to be made here within the next week or so. This is something we could almost have an actual in-place trial and give the community an opportunity to get a feel for how it operates. So with that, Russ, I don't know if you wanted to provide any additional context or anything, or if anyone has any questions now. I know obviously we have a discussion in the meeting as well. Russ,
Yeah, I'll start off. I have a question regarding the Berlin Road intersection. If a semi, for example, is coming out from Berlin Road next to our Trumbull, and they're going to try and cross over, I see the examples for the other routes, but there's not an example. They have a tough time. They're coming out of that stop sign from Marconi's and coming around that raised area and then trying to turn down Berlin Road. Would that be a challenge?
one thing I did want to highlight, Joe, and I apologize, I meant to mention this too. We are modifying that island right there. So we're going to reduce both the length of it and the width of it pretty substantially. Again, it'll be within safety parameters to provide pedestrian refuge, but it'll afford essentially some of the larger vehicles a little more turning radius. So I think it'll make the constraint you're referencing a little more easier. The other thing is too, we're going to design the curve, which is proposed right now to be a square 6-inch curve, like the other island, just on the street from Berlin Road. This one's going to be built more of a rolled curve, kind of like what you see in a roundabout. Essentially, with the anticipation, it's going to get clipped every once in a while, just is what it is. And so at least if it's that rolled curve, it's almost meant to be driven over from time to time. And so that way, I think both reducing the geometric shape of it and then also making it a little smoother on the side, hopefully addresses some of the concerns for longer vehicles.
And then another comment that was made to me about the public was the crosswalk lanes, as far as the white striping, should be thicker in some different areas. And then the turning lanes, for example, if somebody's coming from the west heading east in front of Commerce Plaza, would it be beneficial to make that turning lane, if they're going to go north on Berlin Road, to make that further back if there's multiple cars? I don't know if there's an example of how many cars can fit in there, but to me it looks like maybe 3. If there's more than that, I don't know. Try a boom trailer or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
And they turn to north on Berlin Road?
Yes, north on Berlin Road. The turning lane. And then also the turning lane, if you're coming from the west heading east at Tiffin Ave, and then on the Conagra entrance and River Road entrance, those could be, I just don't know how many cars can fit in there, because also you see a lot of trucks with trailers, with boats, just so that, I mean, we have the space in it, so we can make it bigger.
One of the things we're looking into, specifically the River Road turning lanes, is we're stuck a little bit right now because there's concrete medians on the railroad bridge and then starting on the highway bridge. We just need to work with ODOT to see structural plans of those two bridges to see if they're structural integral to the bridge construction or if they're just relative to if there's curves in terms of traffic management. If they're just traffic management, there's a way we can work around them. There's an option we can make this turning lanes larger for more static space.
And then one other thing, just, if I'm driving, if I'm pulled up to the stop sign next to Berlin Road, next to Marconi's, the Marconi's sign there,
Yeah.
I just don't wanna have any blind spots. And also, like, similar to like Huron Street, it's still, close to that stop sign, you gotta inch up there because you're looking at traffic, so. It's just there's some blind spots there, so I just wanna make sure that those are mentioned and, you know, if there's anything we can do now to make those safer than what they already are, I would hate to hear of another instance.
Yeah, not,
Those are
Sure.
my comments, thoughts.
share concerns, thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
So Mike, that, I'm sorry, the green island, pedestrian island there, that's the larger size of what's shown right now?
Yeah.
I believe 7.
Yeah, it has been modified in this drawing.
Okay.
Mike, I don't know if we're going to discuss it, I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, I don't know yet. And I guess my concern is that this phone calls, and I got some of the people are for it, and people are still against it. I guess my thing was, you know, when this all came up, when you guys talked about this 2 years ago, or
Yeah.
it was kind of a moot point, it wasn't going to be done. And now this pops up, I guess I'm wondering why we're kind of going against what people originally wanted.
Yeah.
And then I'm asking because I got to explain that to.
No, and I can appreciate that, and to be honest, and I think I made the point initially too, obviously I'm cognizant of that, and I don't disagree, I mean, you're right, and sometimes I wonder if I just enjoy bashing my head into a wall, to be honest with you. So, no, I mean, really it was, we're here, the road's being constructed, we've had about 3 or 4 months now with kind of single lane, and it's seemingly overall, but for some issues here and there, it seemed to work just from an anecdotal evidence standpoint, and so I just felt, if nothing else, it behooved asking the question one more time, just if there was interest, you know, I just felt an appropriate course of action, but again, it's all the council's call. If there's not a desire to go through this process, then,
No, I am, and I get, that's why I just
yeah.
got to figure out which way to answer these questions. And then
Understood.
all of a sudden, you know, think he's going to go, look, he's down this now.
Yeah.
And I'm not against trying it out, I guess.
Yeah.
But, good luck public input.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think the first go around, when we first started talking about this,
Yeah.
some of you individuals were on there, it was, everybody came, no, don't change it. But now, having gone through it for a couple of months, it has brought up, a lot of individuals have come to me and said, hey, I think you got your answer when it comes to a road diet.
Right.
That you're going through the busy time.
Right,
And
and
I
I
also
said,
like,
I've had positive and negative.
I also like
Oh, I know.
to even, we have an opportunity to try it for several months with lines out there and no cones.
Yeah.
I think it's, you know, at least worth a try.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. My anecdotal is very consistent with the correspondence that we received is overwhelmingly yes versus no.
Right.
There were some people that were not in favor of it, obviously because you're taking from 2 to 1 lane, but in my discussion with them, I point out, it's 1 lane from Berardi's or Marconi's to Vermillion.
Right.
So it's really only 1 mile of 2 lane that we would be giving up.
Today is a perfect example. I just happened to look out the window and it was an older gentleman and I didn't see his face or know for sure who it is, but just by his movements and you know, quick out of the corner of my eye was riding his bicycle in the construction lane. I mean, they're actually using it that way now. And I do think some of the renewed interest in Main Street and getting that hometown feel back, I think people appreciate that, you know, most downtowns don't have 4-lane highways going through them. And I think this is an opportunity. I mean, it's still going to be, the asphalt's there.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to have a different look than, let's go back to Vermillion, say. But 1 lane and traffic is slower. You can't speed around the cars, you know, impatience. I do. I think it goes back to, pardon the pun, test driving it, and people are using that construction lane while it's there, and they're like, well, this is kind of good.
Yeah, I'd say same thing. I'd get probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 comments a day, all positive. I mean, I see in the correspondence, there's 1 or 2 at the most negative. overwhelmingly positive from what I'm hearing.
And it's a cross-section of people
And
that we got communications from, which was encouraging, that we're hearing.
I mean, obviously, most of the people coming are from the east side of town, because that's who
Yeah,
tends to be riding bikes over the bridge going that direction. That's,
Mr. Scott, so everybody understands what we're talking about here. This is a trial period, temporary striping. What I want to know is what's the criteria we're going to judge this with when we decide to put in permanent striping or put it back to, keep it as 3 lanes or go back to the way it was? What's the criteria we're going to use?
In all honesty, I haven't really thought through what the exact is, but I think a lot of it's just gonna, are we facing traffic issues? Are we facing additional crashes, anything like that?
and the community will let us know.
And community input, yeah, I mean, we'll find out pretty quick whether or not this is.
Will you get with, either the safety committee or the engineers, whoever, and come up with some criteria? Because I don't want to be fighting in this room 6 months. I want criteria.
I think it's a good idea.
I think another opportunity for us is the individuals that have reached out, and obviously left their emails or contact information. I think it would be a great gesture on our part to reach back out to them and gain any feedback after that.
Sure.
Saying, here, this is what you thought prior,
Yeah.
what do you think after?
Great idea.
Watching your flow through most of it.
So, any other comments on this approach to trying this? I mean, this is in absence of being able to have a public, public session also. Is that it? All right.
With that, I will turn it over to the director for help training the regulations. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, so hopefully by now everyone's had a chance to look at the revised version of the chapter 1369 transient rental property. I know there's been a couple people who asked for copies of the red line, and I've provided that. I'm happy to provide that to more people if you would like to see that. I've gotten some feedback already from the zoning department and some excellent suggestions there that hopefully we can incorporate and make it part of this. But I thought what I would do to start with, unless someone had any questions right off the bat, is just kind of go through what some of the key highlights as we see it to this changed chapter.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
So specifically, section 3G2, that they have to live in the property for a full year before they rent.
Okay.
If we can do that, I mean, that's legal.
Well, part of the reason why you're doing this is to help keep Huron as a community. And you can include, you can have residency requirements for a variety of different reasons. And one of those is, if you're trying to get people who are moving in there and maybe they're living there and like, okay, well, I'm going to live part of the time in Huron, part of the time I'm going to live in Florida or somewhere. But what you don't want necessarily is people that are just buying up the property just to turn it into vacation only, and then you lose the people that live here. You lose the affordable housing for people that live here. You change the whole character of the community.
Yeah, I completely appreciate that. I think this is going to be a major sticking point, though. There are people in the community that have turned transient renting into a business.
Right.
That's what's going on. That's
Yeah.
exactly what's going on. They're absentee owners, they're
I
buying
think there's
and
going to
renting.
be a big issue with that one. The second one is the owner of the property has to live within 30 minutes of the home.
Or an agent. They either need to
I missed
live within 30-minute drive or have an agent. That goes to what your point is that it eliminates the absentee landlord who never steps foot in Huron, has umpteen gazillion problems with the property, you can't get a hold of anybody, you can't even serve them with the cease and desist. There's not much you can do about it. with having the requirement that they have somebody local that can be responsible, that can be responsive, helps address a lot of those issues that are being faced here, and quite frankly, they're being faced in a lot of other jurisdictions as well.
If I can interrupt real quick, Christine was nice enough to kind of put together some of the demographics of the people that are either currently registered or on their way. And 38 of them are Huron residents, 44 are residents of the state of Ohio outside of Huron, and 15 are out of state. So significant portion of the people who are currently signed up or on their way to be signed up live outside the city here.
So how many total do we have right now?
Right now we have, Chris, yell at me if I'm wrong with any of these. Right now we have 63 where certificates have been issued, 9 that are waiting inspection, 16 where packets have been mailed to them, and 9 currently where we've sent cease and desist letters that are coming due shortly. So right now we're at 63, soon to be 72, right?
Right.
Signed up.
I'm just itchy about the domicile requirement. I mean, that's almost heavy hand of the government interfering with commerce to a certain extent. I think you're going to get a lot of
And I'm assuming those that are already set up that way are going to be grandfathered in.
Correct.
So, I mean,
Yeah, that was
what we can do about
mine,
that.
that's part of my question too, I had the same
Yeah.
concern as Joel, but, and I guess I was gonna say maybe we could step back and maybe go through the whole thing, your
Yeah.
points, and then we can circle back on some of these.
Right, and that's one of those things that has worked in other jurisdictions. I've not seen where it has become a problem. Again, a lot of these things are things that we can tweak as we go along. But when you buy, if you're buying property, there's a difference between buying something in a residential area where people intend to live versus buying property in a commercial area where you intend to operate a business. The people that are buying in a residential area, you expect them to be residents. That's the primary purpose of the area itself. And in order to promote that, you want to promote people to be invested in the community as well.
Why don't we just go ahead and keep going through
Sure.
this, and then,
Okay. So one of the things that we did, as you can probably see, is we greatly expanded the definition section, and part of that was aimed at including additional terms that would assist you in enforcement measures. For instance, we defined calls for service and have indicated, how that can be deemed, as one of the measures that you can use to determine whether or not that the place is becoming a nuisance or problematic. Now, with some of the comments that I got from the zoning department, I've got some additional changes that we can do that would help both expand that and limit it as well. If you look at paragraph B, where it calls for services, and moving that first paren 1 up into the upper portion, so it would be calls for service means any and all calls, including but not limited to those to law enforcement, fire department, or emergency assistance of any kind. When those calls result in a representative of a law enforcement agency, fire department, or another emergency assistance service being dispatched or directed to the residential premise, and then 1, 2, or 3. So that way, not only does it have to result in somebody actually being dispersed over there, but then once they are there, you have either the evidence of criminal activity, you have instances where you're having arrests or charges or citations of the people that are actually there behind it, or there's a finding of an imminent threat to the safety of persons and property resulting from those activities. So that just gives you a metric. So it eliminates the neighbor that just doesn't like having it there and keeps calling. It's like, well, they're having another party over there. You get there, there's no problem at all. Well, that's not a call for service because it didn't result in one of those other criteria being met. Another one is defining who is an operator as opposed to someone who owns the property, where it's just simply an agent. Keeps both the operator, who could be the owner, it could be a long-term resident, someone who has like a life tenancy or something with the property. Keeps them both responsible to make sure that that property stays within compliance with the chapter. I know there's been a question recently that we fielded where we've got an individual who had rented out property specifically for the purpose of using this transient rental property, and they've never registered it. We're like, well, we're not responsible because I leased it out to someone. No, you are responsible because you're still the owner of the property. You know that it's happening there. You know, allowing it to happen, and you're allowing it to continue to exist and not be in compliance with the chapter. So it keeps the responsibility on both the owner or the operator, the person who registered the residential premises as a transient rental property, and whomever that they appoint, designate, hire, whatever, to manage the property here locally. We've included provisions for hosting platforms to comply with licensing requirements, so that the city notifies Airbnb that there's a property here that has had their registration certificate revoked or it's expired or they've never registered. Then the hosting platform is supposed to remove that within this amount of time. And that acts as both a disincentive for someone who's supposed to get on there, but also helps keep the hosting platforms where they're just making money hand over fist and not having anything to do with the community. You know, they don't care, well, no, they do care. And it's been deemed to be no more of an onerous burden on hosting platforms as any other rule or regulation. So that has been something that has been recognized and upheld in other jurisdictions that we looked at. You'll also see that we included in there provision that the hosting platform reports and pays taxes, the same as any other business operating in the city. We've also requiring the transient rental properties to have designated parking spaces. The current codes require residential properties to have off-street parking. And I believe it requires two places, a spot for two vehicles on the residential premises. This includes that, and it merely then reinforces that, makes any property that does not currently have off-street parking provide for such. So they either need to have parking on their premises or make arrangements somewhere else for that parking to be able to be. So right when you're making the money as the resident, as the owner of that property, and you're putting the burden of the parking problem on all of your neighbors, that doesn't help, and it doesn't make that property a good neighbor, and it causes more problems. And I know that there's been numerous issues involved with people parking all over the place. So it does nothing more than reinforces what the current codes are. And when you make a change in the use of property, at any time you can make sure that something is brought up to code. And that's part of what this is simply making them bring it up to code to be what the current code requires in the city already. And I saw a question on that.
Yeah, this, are you saying that currently chapter 1133 says that residential property, just my house, I'm supposed to have 2 parking spots off street?
That's correct.
That's what the current code says.
That's correct.
There's a ton that don't comply with that in the city.
But if they're wanting to use it as residential, you know, and that's the difference, because if they're continuing to use it as a residence and they're grandfathered in, when they change the use of the property and they're using it now for commercial purposes, you can make them become code compliant.
But we go on to say they have to provide, and I'm like I said, I think there needs to be some way to solve the parking problem, but I'm just trying to figure out because I think later it says that there has to be enough parking spots for the number of vehicles you bring, so.
Correct.
That code says 2, but then we actually add to that, okay.
And that's
Right,
because,
what we're saying.
right, that's because when you have hotels and motels have certain requirements of so many parking spaces per room, it's treated on the same. So if you're going to have somebody, you know, that wants to convert their property into a 10-bedroom party house and they have spot for 1 vehicle, our zoning department will be able to go there and say, no, you don't get that kind of occupancy, or you don't get your certificate issued until you have the number of spots that are going to be required in order to house this number of people, you know, using that facility as overnight accommodations.
I mean, I think it's kind of gray area. If you're going down on public streets, you're parking on the street. Right.
Well, you
Yeah.
can, but and that's another thing too, that the code currently provides, for example, that trailers are not supposed to be left on the street overnight.
I'm talking just about vehicles.
And vehicles, it gives another way that it makes at least initially requires the owner to bring the property into compliance with current code, provides that method in which they have to provide parking if they're going to be using this property in a way that makes money for them, that they're not putting that burden on all of the neighbors just so they can make more money. And there's certain suggestions, I put out there perhaps the idea of having parking permits being associated with properties. And you can look at that on a neighborhood basis even. If there's certain neighborhood where parking is very, very tight, all of the residents in that neighborhood have a parking permit, and if there's a car parked on the street overnight that doesn't have a permit, they can get towed. And that's something also that homeowners associations can really step forward and be responsible for, is that they can have those types of rules and regulations themselves. They can issue their own permits. And
On
they
a
can
public
enforce it.
street though?
If it's
On
part of the
city
homeowners
street?
association, they can have additional requirements that a city otherwise would not be able to.
Even if the street is not a private street by the association, that's what I'm saying. If the street is a city street within the association, you're saying the association could still have an additional restriction on parking.
Right, because when you move into a homeowners association, you move into and agree to additional restrictions that can be imposed by that association. And it's a contract that you enter into. And so you can require them to have extra landscaping, or, have a specific type of mailbox. You could, have 2 trees on a street.
Yeah, that's my
Right,
question.
right. But again, it can go along with what the agreement, the contract that the individual who purchased the property agreed to belong to, and they agreed to abide by the rules and regulations of the homeowners association.
The question is, does the homeowners association have the authority to regulate city taxpayer streets?
Within their jurisdiction, within their homeowners association, yes, they can.
So in the same respect as the other thing on the parking, again, how about all the transit minnows that have already now registered, let's say, for sake of my example, you're not familiar with all the neighborhoods, but, Rye Beach, where there's definitely a serious parking problem. Old Homesteaders,
Right.
a lot of one-car driveways, things like that. Is there a grandfather? I mean, what's gonna happen to people that are already doing it? We've already given them a license or a registration.
Well, there are grandfather provisions, but whenever for example, those people who already have their license, they can be grandfathered in because their current use is already legal. Those who don't have a license, their current use is illegal, and you can require them to bring it up to code in order to meet that. Now, I will look into for you and see if when it comes time for renewal, but I believe you can because they're not guaranteed an absolute right to continue using that property for that purpose. As long as you don't eliminate the any economic use of a property, you generally put in reasonable regulations. But I will look at that and see if we can specifically require even those who already have licenses to comply with that specifically.
If I can put out there, and I'll be real quick, is that our office's concern has always been one of enforcement. So
Sure.
I agree totally with the concept on day one. The problem is enforcement.
Yeah.
How do I, or a member of our police department, go out in front of your house and tell you that that Chevy parked there belongs to your house or not? If they're from out of town. And you alluded to passes, and then maybe there's something there would work. But
Yeah, as
day
opposed
one,
to
that's my biggest fear. is
Someone who
not
lives there,
enforcement.
yeah, as opposed to the person that lives permanently in the house next door.
Yeah.
That's a good,
Right,
good point.
Yeah, and that's where it may be helpful, especially in those really tight neighborhoods, to have that sort of system. I mean, it doesn't have to be citywide. I mean, there are certain, I've used the example before, I live in Lakewood, and I know the neighborhoods or the houses that are closest to the downtown area have resident parking permits. And that allows them to park their vehicle on the street for all day if they want to. But if you don't have that, and you're parked there for more than 2 hours, you can be towed. So it helps the residents, and it also helps eliminate some of those problems. And generally, if you've got somebody who's going to call in and complain and say, well, there's a car that's been parked out there for 2 days now, I haven't seen anybody move it. Well, do you know whose car that is? A lot of times they may know whose it is anyway.
That's
So-
what I'm not-
Wouldn't it be cleaner to just set the the same requirements we have for a business. When they open up a business, they have to have so many parking spaces, right?
Yes,
If somebody wants to have a rental, let's say they have 2 bedrooms, then they should have so many parking spaces.
that's
Would
correct,
it be included just to do that?
that's part of,
And if they can't comply, they don't get a certificate.
right, and that's part of the inspection, and one of the things that's going to be on the inspection is they have to be able to, the operator has to be able to present a parking, plan when they apply for the permit or for the certificate itself. When the zoning inspector, building department goes out there and takes a look at it and checks for all the other life safety, issues that they're looking for to make sure that people aren't going to just burn down in a death trap, then they're also going to be looking and seeing, okay, you say that you want to rent this place and you've got 10 bedrooms here and you only have 1 parking spot. We're not going to give you an occupancy permit for as many people as you have bedrooms because you've not made any, you're not complying with the code requirements, even for residents, much less for what we're requiring in order for you to operate as a business out of that house.
John, did you have something?
Yeah, Monty had a couple questions about, how can we regulate parking on public street? These are like little hotels.
Right.
So when we approve a hotel, your zoning code said it has to have this many parking spots. You can't take 10 of those on the street.
Right.
They've got to be off the street. So I mean,
Right, I understand that.
You know, I mean-
A hotel, they have a parking lot.
pardon me?
A hotel has a parking lot.
I understand that, but most of the complaints that we have received, zoning received, that you guys have received are about parking.
Right, right.
If you allow, without making them comply with your new regulations, when they renew, I've never heard of somebody, they get a license in 2020 and for the next 20 years, they're okay under that 2020 license. So when they renew it in 2021, they should be required to comply with those regulations.
And that's gonna go by occupancy.
What do you mean? It'll go by number of people.
Right.
Your parking, I think, and again, I'm not really aware of what your parking says, but doesn't it say if you have 3 bedrooms, you have to have this many? If you have 4 bedrooms, doesn't it anymore?
I don't have it in front of me, but I think Amelia's right. I think it's 2 per single-family residence, but.
Okay, well, these aren't single-family residences.
I know, but something like what Sam said, that's something that's easily verifiable when you do an inspection. There's 3 bedrooms, you gotta have 3, and there's space for 3 vehicles on your site,
No, it's not one person per.
or whatever.
Or 2
Yeah,
bedrooms,
what's-
3
I mean,
bedroom house,
what's the
you're going
average?
to,
I mean, it used to be 2 bedrooms or, for a single family, and again, I don't know what it is now, but it used to be 2 are 2 cars, 3 are 2.5 cars. Doesn't make any sense that it was 2.5 cars.
yeah.
4 bedrooms are 3 cars. So I think you just enforce your parking code, whatever that says.
Right.
But I also think you gotta remember that these are little hotels.
Right.
Yeah.
And in the complaints we receive are about parking.
So
We receive noise things too, but the PD can take care of that.
So to Sam's point is that if we apply the current parking code, residential parking code, because even though we're saying it's a little business, but it's also a residential business.
Sure.
So maybe that's what we use, so we're not creating a new, because otherwise we're gonna have to create some new metrics of how many.
No, I mean, I feel but if they've
Correct,
got,
that's what I'm saying.
if they've got 6
That would make
bedrooms,
sense.
if they've got 6 bedrooms, they're gonna have more than 2 cars.
Oh, sure.
But that's
So
where
they
you
have
tie
2
your
on site.
occupancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where you tie your occupancy
Yeah.
permit to the number, to the parking
Yeah.
plan.
Well, I think later it said in here, if I'm not mistaken, didn't it say you have to provide enough parking spots for the number of cars? But we don't know, even if it's 2 families that are bringing 4 people or 5 people in a car, then they have less cars. How do we determine what the average number of people per car is?
I think you go by bedrooms. If they've
That's-
got
that's
2
why-
bedrooms, they
That's
have
what I'm
2
saying,
cars.
if you do it that way, I think.
If they have 4 bedrooms, they have 4 cars.
And that's where we can address that, we can make those requirements. The ORC has actually been amended to include, to reduce the number of bedrooms that is required in order to still to be deemed a hotel. And I think it's largely because of the growth of the transit rental properties. So yes, you can treat them more like hotels and say, all right, you're gonna have 2 bedrooms, you're gonna have at least 2 spots for a car. It's like, well, I've got my small child with me. that's fine, but that goes back to the person who is leasing property out. They're the ones who has to make sure that they provide information to people that are going to be renting it, and the people who are renting it find out that it does, they have issues directly with them. But again, that's where we have on the occupancy permit, and part of the thing that's going to be supposed to be posted there on the residence itself. When you go in and you check a place and you've got room for 2 cars and you've got 10 bedrooms, well, you're going to have, maybe a maximum occupancy, say, of 4 people. Well, why are only 4 people? I got 10 bedrooms. Because you're not allowed for parking for that many people.
That's the point I'm trying to get to. Doug brought up enforcement. It's a lot easier to enforce when we hand them their certificate than it is after the fact.
But you don't want to do something you can't enforce.
Right.
You know what I mean? You don't want to do something and all of a sudden have these guys come back and go, we can't enforce that.
But that I can enforce because I can limit the occupancy to say 8 people, and then if we catch them advertising that it exceeds 12, we can pull the permit.
Yeah. Okay.
So the park, yeah. And I don't disagree with any of it, I'm just saying, I think we're gonna, in Huron in particular, there's gonna be some big houses that are gonna get really limited because they can't provide park.
Well,
I understand that,
they don't have the absolute right to use their house as anything other than a single-family resident right now. And all you're doing is requiring them to abide by that same type of rule, and if they want to expand the type of use and they want to start making money out of it, well, they need to comply with the rules that make them continue to make that property a good neighbor.
So they'll have to expand their driveway or parking.
Yes, they would.
Yard.
Yes, and they would have to, in order to satisfy all the code requirements, in order to do that.
And now, if someone got creative in a park, they have to provide parking lot. If they somehow had a way to say, I know, 3 doors down, I can provide this parking, and I offer that rent, I mean, maybe that's if it's something that's legitimate and that's part of the parking plan, then that would help. I'm just trying to think of outside the box of what someone might want.
Don't you have a section of your code now that you can't park in a yard?
Yes.
Yeah.
So they can't just pull up?
No, for sure.
He's talking about if they say.
But I mean,
No, I know that.
Somebody-
Someone got a big parking.
Oh, they're just having to be close to another business that they know would allow 2 spots, and it's just, I'm trying to.
Well, and that's where they have to provide your parking plan.
Correct,
So
that's what I'm
if they
saying.
say that,
Yeah.
and he goes and he checks and he finds out that business knows nothing at all about it, nope,
Then that doesn't work.
that doesn't work. Now, he could enter into an agreement with that business and allow that.
I'm confused, I couldn't find it. So the requirement is all on-prem? All
Yes.
parking is okay.
Yes.
Joe, there's a red line in your copy of the sheet. There you go.
Right, and by doing that, I mean, we try to not create as much new legislation to address that issue, but bring it into what is the current code that you can change, and you can make it even more strenuous for these types of properties, but at least it requires them to be part of the existing code for their parking that is currently required for residents in the city anyway. All right, any other questions on that one? Okay. We've also provided with that better mechanisms to ensure that Huron doesn't become a city of nothing more than vacation rentals by limiting the number of properties that have an owner-occupied requirement prior to new registration. So again, you've got people who already have it, they already own it, that's fine, but your idea is that this is a city of residents. This is, if they want to go and they want to buy place for a hotel or for investment purposes, that's fine, there are places for that. But when they buy those types of properties, you're taking away the ability for people who live here, who work here, who want to live here and be part of the community, to be a part of the community, drives up the cost for those that are able to find that type of property. And it also then helps, you've got that link that tie into the community and people that are already maybe invested in the community and lessens the likelihood that you're going to have somebody who's just going to start renting it out in a couple of years and just abandon it once they've gotten all the economic use out of it. Yes?
How did you come to the number of 200?
That one I just pulled up as just an idea, just to kind of get us thinking about, what number do we want? What maximum limit? We could be higher, we could be lower, it could be significantly lower.
We take it one step further and say, there's only this many that can be in the R1 zone, there's
you absolutely can. You can limit it to whatever zoning. If there's, if it's not, specific zone, I mean, some cities have like an R2A, an R1A, R1B, R1C, you can do that. Or you can have, if it's more difficult to have that type of zoning, and you've got an R1 zoning through almost the whole city, well, it's a lot harder to do that unless you put zoning overlays. And so, just an idea at least for a starting point of, let's think about how many properties we want to limit this to, so that way we don't eliminate all of the good housing for people who live here in this community.
When Corey and I had our initial meeting with Granicus a couple months ago, and they'll be online here in the coming months, their snapshot of Huron, they found in the middle of July that there was somewhere around 140. Corey's saying, in what they found between 60-some online sites. Best guess as to what's existing now.
Based on people that advertise for rent.
Yeah, which is how we go after them.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a handful that do it kind of a little more under the radar.
That it can be hard to find, so add 20% to that.
Yeah.
I would best guess that's as close as.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Is there any way to find out those 72 that you mentioned that are pending, what districts they sit in during industrial?
Vast majority is in an R1. They're mostly Joe's single-family homes.
And again, so that number right there, I basically just picked an arbitrary number just to get something in there so we can start thinking about that process. It can be limited to the 63, it can be limited to the 72 that we've got in the pipeline. You can limit it to 75. You can make the limit below what we currently have, and then through attrition, as people lose or they don't renew, then if they don't renew by the deadline, they have to wait until there's another opening for another transient rental property. So once you set that, anybody who currently has one won't lose theirs just because you have a limit and the number that are existing is over the limit. But if they lose their certificate for some other reason, they don't renew on time, then they don't get to until there's an opening for that type of certificate again.
Okay, we're getting to a point where we're going to run out of time. We've only got about 3 minutes.
Okay.
So my question is this, we still seem to have a lot of questions. Should we table this legislation and bring it back up for a work session at our next meeting?
I think so.
I think we need, we probably need a full work session. Plan on it. Just because I think we need to hammer through these before we start voting,
Absolutely.
even though we would do 3 readings. I just think
Right.
that makes sense.
And we anticipate there'll be plenty of questions
Yeah.
and a lot of tweaks that we have to do it. Like I said, with the comments I got from the zoning department already, we've already got a couple of tweaks that we could add that would make it both better and, clarify any ambiguities. One other thing that I did want to point out that we did is we're we're making sure that anyone that has a transit rental property, that now they have to comply with all applicable laws and codes, not just limited to what's in that chapter. They have to comply with everything that's already in existence in the city of Huron or the state of Ohio that would be applicable to that address. Also, we provided for a hearing mechanism in order to satisfy due process issues with respect to people who are losing their, or have, are fined for violations of the chapter or have their certificate revoked, will have the hearing process. And finally, increasing the fees for violations, so it eliminates that idea of, well, I'll just wait until they catch me because paying the fine is cheaper than getting a certificate. So, yeah, adding a little bit of a carrot and stick on that.
All right, so is everybody in agreement with that? We'll table these, and then we'll table those and come back in 2 weeks for another work session.
And, feel free to send me emails in the meantime, and I can circulate another draft. If anyone wants to see a red line copy of the existing one, I'm happy to email that out as well. I'll probably go ahead and get back with the zoning department on those specific questions and email everyone with those changes that we're working on in response to those questions already. And that will be in a red line form.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
There's nothing else, motion to adjourn the work session.
So moved.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
Klaus,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
All right, everybody ready, or we need 5 minutes? 5 minutes?
Thanks, John.
All right. City Council for Tuesday, September 22nd. Please stand for a moment of silence and the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Clerk, call the roll.
Crawford.
Here.
Klaus,
Here.
Pat,
Here.
Martino,
Here.
Dyke,
Here.
Hardy,
Here.
Maybe.
Here.
Latest comment?
I have two, or I have one, to read. Let's go through that one first. Mr. William Bilcone, 122 Acre Tree Drive, Huron. And this is part of the statement, and we're reserving the rest of it for the road diet discussion. I have concerns about the proposed DORA in the city. While I'm not against the concept, I feel that consideration needs to be made to either have multiple zones or expand the zone. Right now, as the proposed zone looks, as seen posted online, it lacks notable locations such as Knucklehead Sandbar, Huron Yacht Club, as well as restaurants that also serve alcohol, like Jim's Pizza Box, Huron Pizza House, Berardi's, and Marconi. I feel that this creates a competitive advantage through legislation for the ones included in the current zone, including two businesses where two members of council have vested interest. The other concern I have with the proposed DORA is its effect on festivals of vocation. Currently, all festivals with alcohol are restricted to having designated drinking areas. This helps preserve a more family-friendly atmosphere and helps regulate who can be drinking. If the DORA is allowed to go through, potentially the entire festival grounds becomes open to alcohol and therefore essentially unable to be regulated by the festivals. This could help create underage drinking at festivals, as well as conditions much like you may remember from water festivals of the 1980s. I urge council to thoroughly consider the DORA effect and be inclusive to all local businesses.
Alright, if I take this off. so you
Sure.
can hear me. Hi, my name is Alexis Miller. I'm running for state representative. I wanted to take some time tonight to come out and listen to a meeting and just tell you a little bit about myself in the 3 minutes I think I have. I was born and raised in Sandusky and I went to Perkins. So I've lived here basically my whole life with the exemption of I went to Ohio State. So I have an undergrad and graduate degree from there, and after my husband and I finished grad school, we moved back home. So I'm really excited to be home. I'm really excited to run to represent us in Columbus. I actually have worked in this office I'm running for, so I understand, I think, a very good understanding of what the job is and how to do it. And in particular, I think, from the local government perspective, how state and federal government has impacted, operational funding and the ability for local communities to get things done, first with the local government funding and now with the CARES Act funding. So I do think I have some good perspective, but I didn't want to bring my agenda. I just wanted to come to introduce myself and to listen to what's going on. So I appreciate your time. Thank you for what you're doing for the people of Huron, and I look forward to meeting you afterward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, next up we have a presentation.
Okay, get off really quick before they get started. I just wanted to make introduction. So we have legal counsel and operations personnel from Ohio. Basically, it's our nonprofit partner that helps us with the establishment and operation of our public power. The presentation tonight is specific to the ongoing project that we're looking at, the proposed sale of the transmission assets relative to our public power at our substation site. And so the purpose of tonight, I just wanted an opportunity for council to hear just an introduction from the folks at AMT, the kind of genesis of how this strategy came to be from AMT's perspective, how it benefits both parties, the mutual relationship going forward, and then if there are any additional questions from council, then obviously I know we're working towards the legislative process and doing our due diligence, but just an opportunity to get a chance to meet the folks that are potentially going into business with and just hear some of the specific information pieces. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa McAllister, Ed Tatum of Ohio and AMT. So I kick it off from there. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we got you, Lisa.
Great, thank you. My name is Lisa McAllister, and I'm the General Counsel for AM Transmission, and then I'm General Counsel for Regulatory Affairs with American Municipal Power, which is our parent company. And with me this evening is Ed Tatum, who's Vice President of Transmission at both AM and EM Transmission. So we have a short presentation for you, and then, as was mentioned, we'd be happy to take questions. So I'm going to do my best to share my screen here, so bear with me.
Gotta love the technology.
All right, are you seeing the Huron EM transmission presentation?
No.
No.
Okay, let's keep trying.
Corey, you can make the host.
There we
Sorry.
Okay, everybody can see the slide presentation now? All right. So we just wanted to give a little bit of background about AM transmission and then go into a little bit of the proposed project for the city of Huron.
facilities. You guys have already built facilities. We would like to partner with you to have you guys working with operations and our maintenance and planning decisions. We view you as a partner, not as a customer. Actually, I view you as my boss. The cost of developing new and maintaining existing transmission facilities would be allocated across the entire Axis zone. Now, we can spend some time, I'm sure we'll get Q&A on this, but just as a prelude to it, our industry has changed dramatically over the past 25 years, and we talked about, Lisa mentioned the need for comparable service and facilities. Transmission facilities enable competitive markets, and that's where our industry has moved to. And because of this, there's been all these rules that have been developed as to how transmission should be viewed and allocated. And if facilities are generally deemed to be networked and are beneficial to a wide range of folks, then there's a cost allocation that's different than a local. And we can talk more about that in a moment. We bring you a strategic partnership for planning your future transmission needs. And hopefully we'll be able to increase your effectiveness in providing electric service to new customers. We work for you. We do not have distribution affiliates, and so our sole focus is on seeing what we can do for you folks. Finally, here we have some of my favorite acronyms: the North American Electric Reliability Council, bulk electric system. Definitions have changed dramatically. That's, Lisa mentioned, that's how we got into the business, helping our friends out at Napoleon with some of their obligations. And so we can take that on and establish relationships and processes to cover that for folks. Lisa, we'll go to the next slide. We have excellent transmission planners, or planner, and that's because he's so good we don't need one. And he is taking a very close look at not only your system, but the surrounding area, and trying to come up with potential solutions, not only for your short-term need, but looking longer. So this is a pictorial of the local area transmission system. You guys are up in the, I don't know how well you can see it, but I see a little red dot with a push pin there. And so then we have blue is 138 kV lines that are owned by ATSI, and green and the black is our 69 kV lines owned by ATSI. Next slide, Lisa. So one of the things that we talk about is, and we are, Ryan's been involved in discussions with your folks, is what are your current needs and what are your future needs? And based on those discussions, it seems that from a reliability standpoint, to meet AMP transmission reliability criteria, you all will need a second feed in some way, shape, or form in the very near future. And so that's the discussion that I've been having. This is a simple pictorial to give you a before and after shot, if you will, as to what you currently have on the left, and then a possible configuration that we propose on the right. Next slide. This is a visual of the assets that would be proposed for purchase. Again, we are looking at purchasing only, if you will, transmission assets. Distribution assets would remain the property and responsibility of Huron. And so I will take a breath, and Lisa and I are available to answer any and all questions you may have. Thank you.
Sir, what's ATSI, A-T-S-I?
I'm so sorry. American Transmission. They're the First Energy holding.
Oh.
I'm sorry about that. I get stuck in these acronyms.
No other questions?
Have a great night.
You too.
All right, we'll move on to, there's no old business, we'll move on to new business.
Okay, we're gonna sign off.
First on the new business is ordinance number 2020-17, Mr. Hardy.
Mr. Mayor, I move that ordinance number 2020-17 be placed on its first reading.
Any discussion on placement of first reading? Please call the roll.
Hardy.
Yes.
Peggy.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Cloud.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes.
Martina.
Yes.
Getty.
Yes.
Yes. Ordinance, the next one is an ordinance amending ordinance number 219-27, adopted December 10th, 2019.
17.
17, I'm sorry.
17.
17, I'm sorry, I got the wrong one. Thank you. It's an ordinance authorizing and describing the manner of sale of a portion of Huron Public Power Substation transmission assets owned by the city of Huron, located on permanent parcel number 42-001-20.00, and more particularly described in Exhibit A, and authorizing the inter-city manager to enter into an agreement for the sale of that portion of property to AMP Transmission LLC.
Good evening, everyone. Again, just to highlight some of the discussion topics we discussed at the previous meeting, and then just to follow up on the presentation from AT. This is basically the work now with 10 months worth of due diligence and an opportunity, I think, to partner with an organization who exists really to serve the city's economic development goals and aspirations with Huron Public Power, both from a financial standpoint and also from an operational standpoint. I think this provides a lot of great benefit to the city. One of the things is immediate cash inflow in terms of hitting the balance sheet of the city and impacting our immediate debt capacity. Working with bond counsel and our financial advisor in terms of what the next appropriate steps are, and we'll be making reports and recommendations to council assuming this is able to go forward. And just for council's benefit as well as we look towards the legislative calendar on this, we do have some minor tweaks within the language that we'll try and get out as soon as possible prior to the next read, so that you have a chance to fully digest what the changes are compared to the agreement they have within there. I wouldn't consider any of them to be material changes, and if anything, one of them might deem a substantial benefit to the city. If you remember the last meeting, we talked about the right of first refusal opportunity. In the event that MT isn't able to hit some of the regulatory requirements that they need to, we've asked for an extended period of time in terms of what that window looks like for the city to make that determination if we have an interest in purchasing those assets back. So I think that's only in our best interest. Ultimately, I think it's worst case scenario, and based on AMT's track record and the 5 other communities and transactions they've done to this point with great success, I don't anticipate that happening, but obviously planning for worst case scenario. With that, unless there's any other specific questions or anything relative.
Yeah, and Mike, in the event of a rate modification with Mucci, would that be coupled with this or completely separate? And is one dependent on the other?
Any rate modification with Mucci is dependent upon the sale. Otherwise, I'd stick with the strategy being from the start with Mucci is that ultimately the city built the substation specifically to serve Mucci Farms. Ultimately, now it does serve the electrical service for the rest of Huron Public Power customers, but short of having that portfolio of energy on our books, there was no need for a substation. And so I would say any opener or precursor to a rate modification with Mucci has to be preceded by this action.
Just quickly, if you can, what is the difference between, they said transmission they would own, distribution we would continue to own. What, they showed the picture.
Yeah.
What is the difference, or what is the?
On a high level, transmission is basically the infrastructure that gets the power from the generation plant to your initial meters. So think your water plant and then the line of water mains, that's your transmission. Post meter is the distribution side, so that's the transformer that steps it down from 16 kV to 15 and then puts it into your distribution system. So those are like your water service line. And so basically distribution is Ohio Edison, that will be us. That's Huron Public Power. So we're still your utility of record, we're still billing. All the financial operations are still the cities. Transmission is basically First Energy, that's who creates the power and then sends it to. So AMT would basically be the transmission portion of this.
It made it seem like there was something out there that was.
Yeah, there is. So at the substation itself, that's the asset they'll be purchasing. It's hard to explain specifically without going on showing you, but it's a lot of the transformers are basically the boxes that are on pads. And I think there's 3 out there now. We'll maintain ownership of those, and then everything before, earlier in the system, so I think some of the higher tower areas, the lines actually going in, that's the transmission asset that we'd be selling, and ultimately become their responsibility from an O&M standpoint. Everything behind the transformers, all the meters stepping it down, all the distribution lines into Huron Public, or into the Huron Corporate Park, that's all Huron Public Powers, we retain ownership, excuse me.
So in their picture, what they had plotted in red was the transmission. That's what.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to see
Yeah,
that.
it was everything on the left.
Okay, on the left, the
Yep.
tower. Thank you.
Any other questions? And that was first reading.
Those official
We'll
rules
go
are
on, nothing else will go on. Is it placed on first reading?
So, yeah, the previous meeting, we made a motion to have it on for first reading, and then there wasn't actually a vote on it. So this is technically the first reading. So, just for the record.
All right, we'll go on. Next is, ordinance number 2020-24.
Mr. Mayor, I move that ordinance 2020-24 be placed on its first reading. Excuse me, waive the 3 reading rule and be placed on its first reading.
Any discussion on the placement of first reading? Please call the roll.
Hagee.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Yes, an ordinance amending ordinance number 219-27 adopted December 10, 2019 to provide for an additional appropriation from general fund and other funding sources, an increase in estimated resources, and further approving cash transfers between funds and declaring emergency.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we declare this ordinance an emergency.
Any discussion on the emergency?
Hagee.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Would like Mr. Swayze to put it away?
Good evening, council. The ordinance in front of you today is for appropriation measures that include supplemental appropriations and transfer of budget among funds. Also included are increase in estimated resources. And second page includes cash transfers from and to funds. Just to note before getting into the details, the net impact of all of these changes on the budget side for appropriations and estimated resources is net zero. So although we're increasing budget, we are also increasing estimated resources. Going down into the details a little more, we are increasing a transfer out from the general fund to the capital improvement fund of $75,000. This is mainly due to recently pay for additional paving in the Chaska and Old Homestead neighborhoods. In addition, the city also bought 2 new school radar signs and expected to purchase 2 more by the end of 2020. The reason for the transfer now is we do feel comfortable with our financial outlook, at least right now, to be able to pay for these additional projects. Also, in discussion with the court and this review of their revenue, over the past few months, it does appear that their probation fund revenue is remaining steady compared to the rest of their revenue for 2020. So the clerk of court has asked that the probation officer's salary be paid 100% the rest of the year out of the probation fund. So that will take a little bit away from the general fund, which is a good sign. And going forward, as we discuss 2021 budget, we will discuss doing more of a 60-40 split out of probation and the general fund rather than the traditional 50-50. I know it's been done the last few years. So that looks like that can be a good possibility going forward, which is also a good sign. In addition, the increase to appropriations in the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which is Fund 226. If you remember, we created that a few months ago based on the CARES Act funding from the states. I know we talked about it a little bit earlier. The second distribution that we received this month was $70,000. So the supplemental appropriation is $70,000 to properly budget for that. That's also including estimated resources. On page 2, the capital, or the cash transfers out include the $75,000 just mentioned, that's coming from the general fund to the capital improvement fund. And also, if you remember from the beginning of the pandemic, we did hold off on any major capital transfers to keep funds within their operational funds, mainly the fire department general fund. Due to the financial outlook now, we are safe to transfer some of the capital equipment that the fire department's planning to purchase at the end of this year and next year to properly fund those purchases. So that's the $136,000 that's coming out of the fire levy fund into the capital equipment fund. So I can answer any questions if you'd like.
Quickly, you said the clerk, the clerk has asked that that be paid out of the probationary fund. Is that, they've agreed to that, or we've asked them to do that?
They've actually brought it to my attention.
Okay.
So yeah, go forward. Yep. Yeah, the judge actually, he signed off on our, we have status sheets to allocate that. And he signed off on it, so yeah, we're all good.
Any other questions? Please call the roll for final adoption.
Hady,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Klaus,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Next is ordinance 2020-25.
Mr. Mayor, I move that 3 reading rule be waived and ordinance number 2020-25 be placed on its first reading.
Any discussion on waiving 3 reading? Please call the roll.
Hady,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Klaus,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Yes, an ordinance amending and restating section 521.06 of the codified ordinance of the city of Huron relating to the duty to keep sidewalks in repair and clean, declaring emergency.
Mr. Mayor, I move that ordinance 2020-25 be declared an emergency.
Any discussion on the emergency? Please call the roll.
Hady,
Yes.
Crawford,
Yes.
Klaus,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. So in ongoing efforts to bolster some of our code enforcement efforts, this is a reimagined program relative to sidewalk maintenance within the community. Basically, the way the current ordinances state is that sidewalks abutting your property are the responsibility of the property owner themselves. This continues in that theme and then lays out the parameters in terms of what the appropriate measures are from a remediation and enforcement action to start to help improve some of the walkability throughout the community and improve the overall infrastructure of sidewalks. As the code states now, city's enforcement actions are through criminal action. I don't feel that that's necessarily the best overall action to charge someone criminally with a misdemeanor. I think it's an M3 for sidewalk infractions. And so what this would be is handling it through the typical assessment process. And so the city administration would imagine upon adoption of these ordinances, we create essentially a sidewalk maintenance program that on an annual basis, we conduct a field inspection, highlight deficiencies within the community, allow for a remediation period and time frame for the homeowners themselves to be put on notice of the infrastructure deficiencies, and then what options exist in terms of, is there leveling options, repair, grinding, reconstruction. And then assuming those fixes are either made or not made, there's an opportunity to partner with the city utilizing our wholesale purchasing power on a bidding process that we could go out and then contract with one contractor and implement, on an annual basis a sidewalk repair and replacement program. Then highlighted within here as well as what the assessment terms would be, and this is really for council input, but if there's some additional amendments. The way we laid it out was that there's essentially 2 options. $5,000 being the demarcation line. Anything under $5,000 would be payable on a 5-year basis, assuming they utilize the assessment process. Anything $5,000 and above would be payable over 10 years. So essentially it's listed in there as 10 semi-annual payments or 20 semi-annual payments. We handle the process basically through working with the county auditor on the assessment basis. So this gets added to the property tax rolls. The reason from staff's perspective and the request for the emergency is relative to two pieces of legislation after this is the initial proceedings enforcement action for creating an assessment on the sidewalk project right in front of Colonial Colony Apartments. We've been working with them for the last 3 or 4 months to set up the parameters and agreement in order to get those projects done. It's still like we have pricing. It's very competitive pricing. I'd like to get that project done sooner rather than later. This gives us that affordability to go through the assessment process, and that's the request for the emergency. We would come back to council through both the budget process and just from a general city manager report to council on establishing the sidewalk maintenance program for 2021 budget. One of the things that's also, just real quick, that's highlighted within here is the creation of a code enforcement fund. Currently, a lot of these projects are handled within the zoning line items of the general fund. We want to demarcate those funds out. And then it provides the finance director the opportunity, a little cleaner when the reports come in on assessment payments, so we can keep track of those things specifically within the code enforcement fund. So, take any questions? Sure.
Just so I understand, we are going to fix a sidewalk and then assess them, and we're paying for it up front, but they're paying us back over the long term, correct?
Yes. And they have the opportunity to pay us back immediately. They have the chance to fix them themselves just to make sure that the city's being competitive from a cost standpoint. If they don't choose to pay them immediately, like I said, the $5,000 demarcation on them for 5 or 10 years. So, yeah.
I noticed 64, reading ahead, has interest. Does this have interest as well?
This follows ORC and assessment, which allows us to charge whatever the prime rate is. And I've put in for reference, I believe, I have to defer to the legal. I believe prime rate right now is 5%.
So there is interest on the.
We have the ability to charge interest, yeah. I'd recommend, especially on some of the larger projects, that we would, just because you could come for inflation. Especially if the city's upfront cost now, that we're not getting repaid for 10 years.
Right.
I think it's only fair. Yeah.
The Colonial County, was there something with the county on that?
Yeah, so there is, I think there's 2 panels right there that were significantly impacted by, they have a pump station right there, there's a manhole. So part of this is we are gonna work with them to make sure that they cover the fair use section as well.
Mike?
Yeah.
Just, this is all repair of existing. We're not getting into, when we get into looking at neighborhoods or inspections of these areas, that
Correct.
there's no sidewalks.
Correct. Yeah, just repair of existing.
Okay.
Mike, previously, we did not have an assessment program whatsoever, correct?
Technically, ORC allows us to go through the assessment process, but it wasn't in congruence with our code. And so basically, this modifies our code to be in congruence. We've done sidewalk assessments before, and it's a legal process. It's just this, since we were already working in Colonial County on the process, we felt this was the cleanest way, so we created the program moving forward.
All right, any other questions? Please call the roll and find out that.
Hady.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Next is ordinance 2020-26.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the 3 reading rule be suspended and ordinance 2020-26 be placed on its first reading.
Discussion on first reading. Please call the roll.
Hady.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
An ordinance amending and restating section 149.01A of the codified ordinances of the city of Huron relating to the duty of division of streets and parks, sidewalks, abutting city-owned lots or city-owned land to repair and clean and declaring emergency.
Mr. Mayor, I move that ordinance 2020-26 be declared an emergency.
Discussion, emergency. Please call the roll.
Hady.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
So just the same as abutting property owners that are privately owned, sidewalk responsibility, obviously then any sidewalks above public property, these would also be the responsibility of the city. This is how we operate in practice, it's just the language within the existing codified is clumsy. So as we really think into this, we figure it's a good opportunity for that as well. So this is just reaffirming how we operated, and I think the intent of the code, but this just cleans up the language.
questions? Please call the roll, final adoption.
Amy,
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Amy, Hardy.
Yes.
Sorry.
All right, next resolution number 2020-64.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the three reading rule be suspended and resolution 2020-64 be placed on its first reading.
Any discussion on place on first reading? Please call the roll.
Amy,
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
A resolution ordering repair of public sidewalks abutting certain premises in the city and declaring emergency.
Mr. Mayor, I move that resolution 2020-64 be declared an emergency.
Discussion on emergency. Please call the roll.
Amy,
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Again, just to highlight this, specifically the need for the emergency on previous ordinance, this resolution authorizes our office to complete the fix. And then just for a sample in terms of how that, what council will see on an annual basis once the city completes its sidewalk inspection program would be a resolution presented to council that highlights all the parcel numbers specifically that will be impacted on an annual sidewalk basis. The legislation will look just like this resolution specifically. Once adopted, this resolution authorizes Doug working with the contractor to start the assessment process and the reconstruction of those sidewalks. Just for the benefit of the group, we've been in constant communication with the ownership. This is something they're absolutely amenable to. They've actually, we threw it out there as just as a potential, and it was something that they thanked us for the opportunity. They had some financial impacts over this year relative to COVID and some vacancy issues, and so I think this is a way that we can work together, still see stretch of sidewalk get improved, but then help them from a cash flow and financial aspect. So I think a good piece of legislation here. Excited to see that stretch fixed up. Sure.
You put in here that you could charge interest up to 5%, and is that because we haven't decided to or not?
It'll flow based on whatever the current rate ends up being. And so it's just, this gives the authorization, and once we finalize the cost, we'll set what that interest rate is.
Any other questions?
Yes.
John,
So we're fixing
Correct.
other people's sidewalks and charging now in this ordinance?
Correct. In this resolution, we're fixing the sidewalks in front of those three parcels specifically, so it's Colonial Colony Apartments.
Okay.
Upfront the cost, working with them in the assessment through the county auditor with the applicable interest rate.
I'm just curious on the payback, is that done in conjunction with another bill, like a tax bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's added to your tax duplicate, so it'll show up on a line item on the property tax bill, your typical levies, and then it'll say special assessment revenue.
Joe, when we receive the collection and the settlement, we can see which funds they need to be charged to. So we'll create a separate sidewalk repair, code enforcement fund, probably at the next meeting here, special revenue fund, so we'll know what fund to charge that to when we get the money.
They were all given the opportunity to do this, and they said they'd rather work with the city.
Yeah, we provided the pricing, and they couldn't beat it, and like the opportunity to pay it off over time.
I think, did Doug originally start with them last fall, I think?
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? Hearing none, please call the roll, final adoption.
Amy,
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Next is ordinance number 2020-27.
I think we're gonna table that one, we're not gonna do that one tonight.
Okay. Then the next one is 2020-60.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the three reading rule be waived and resolution number 2020-60 be placed on its first reading.
Discussion on the first reading. Please call the roll.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Martino.
Yes.
A
resolution authorizing the interim city manager to accept a proposal and enter into an agreement with OpenGov for the purchase of budgeting and planning software and provision for professional service related thereto at a cost not to exceed $45,560.
Thank you. So just touch on again, this was touched on in the work session relative to some of the CARES Act utilization. So OpenGov specifically, remember a few years ago, the state through Josh Mandel's office, when he was treasurer, introduced a bulk purchasing option for cities to sign on to through OpenGov. Basically, it's a transparency financial platform. The project at the time was called Ohio Checkbook, and that was something we came on board with, I believe, was it shortly after Corey, I think we were done implementation, shortly after Corey came on board. So OpenGov as a company offers a host of transparency and financial planning, budgeting software. And so basically what's before you guys tonight is the initial steps of, with the remainder of 2020 to authorize that, utilizing CARES Act funding under the justification to both enhance from the city perspective our ability to make better open, transparent financial planning and decision making. And then also it is cloud-based software, so in the event that there is we have access to a lot of these things virtually well. Just some of the examples of how I would imagine this would work is basically it really streamlines and creates electronic workflows for the budgeting process, whereas a lot of that's done manually internally. So from an operations standpoint, great efficiencies. I think honestly we joke internally, just having the software on board will create enough efficiency within the departments that I think it's almost the equivalent of creating a new position, bringing someone on board. So we're very excited from an administrative standpoint. I still think even prior to CARES Act funding, this was something that was operationally that fit within our financial means. I did highlight within the work session specifically that this is being paid for out of CARES Act funding, and as part of that third distribution, because we're in kind of a holding pattern on that third distribution, the only thing I throw out to the group, and ultimately it's your discretion, but if in the event we're on the 3-week gap line of council meetings, our preference as it is budget season right now would be get up and running on this as soon as possible. If council would want to entertain a motion to authorize this resolution pending acceptance and distribution of the third phase, and in the event that it's done in our 3-week window now, I'd have the discretion and authority to execute that contract, so that we don't have to wait till the next council meeting. So I'll throw that off to the group. Any questions about OpenGov specifically? Again, from a financial standpoint too, basically it's a tracking and reporting software that can really report on anything that's quantifiable, any data points of the city altogether. There's some really great examples when they're available in terms of what other cities have done with it, all the way up including an online living document that's your budget book that's published on an annual basis. So a lot of technological improvements, a lot of open financial transparency and data that's out there.
So did I understand it correctly to say if we do not get the third tranche from the state, we're not going to acquire this?
No, I would still make the recommendation that we do move forward with it, but I just want to make sure from a funding standpoint, council's comfortable with that, and knowing that it's a big chunk up front. With the CARES Act funding, obviously it's an easy justification. In the event that it's not, maybe it's something we look towards next budget season, since it is on point. That'd be about a $50,000 increase in improvement on existing appropriations. So,
Joe, more than likely, we won't be able to use it for this budget season since we are kind of in the middle of it, or at least kind of how things started. So budget-wise, we'll probably start using it for 2022, but immediately we start using it for financial reporting and other type of scenarios and capital planning that we can do. So yeah, I would suggest that we could not use that third wave. I think we would still recommend for that purchase, but we can come back another meeting to ask for that purchase formally.
The trigger is get the money and then you can
No, we
execute this. If you don't get the money, you can't execute this.
if we don't get the money, then I would ask council to consider this for 2021 operational budget, since this wasn't planned expenditure this year.
So just so I'm clear, the vote is contingent on getting the.
As of right now, if
CARES
you guys vote to adopt this, I can sign the contract tomorrow. I'm throwing out just for the group, just to modify the language within the resolution to authorize my office to execute the contract pending distribution and award of the third wave of CARES Act funding.
Corey, have you used something like this in the past?
Well, I guess you can say right now we have a budgeting system called VIP Analytics that we use. And, not very user-friendly. So going through the training that we went through with OpenGov here in their presentation, it would make our lives a lot easier on preparing budgets and any type of capital plan, and easier for council to understand too.
And did I understand that it can be linked to the websites of people that are inquiring? If it's just, I mean, it's
Yeah.
layman's terms, user-friendly for the community as well?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I will say too, there is the opportunity to use it for this budget season. I think I mentioned previously, just based on the timing of the new city manager, I've recommended council to consider doing temporary appropriations. So the spending plan for the first 3 months will allow the new city manager the opportunity to be involved in the budget. So essentially shift your budget calendar back 3 months would be typical. We'll be going through the really heavy duty stuff now. So there is the opportunity that once we onboard this through the holiday season, that we can be utilizing this for the creation of 2021 permanent budget. So just how it out.
We're kind of 2 steps ahead of where we've been in the past anyway with what you all performed last year, creating that 10-year budget book plan. So I would think life should be easier for you this year anyway.
It's
Should-
easier.
It's easier.
You saw all the things we went through last
We
year.
get all the
Yeah.
COVID.
Let's do this. Let's quantify saying easier than last year.
Yes.
You get all the COVID reports you're doing now.
What's COVID?
All right, any other discussion?
We do amendments then?
Yeah, so I would recommend, Joe, if council's in favor of that, Joe, just a motion to amend the legislation to add that caveat that my office will execute this upon receipt of the bill.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to Mike's office into amend the agreement. Is that what-
Based on COVID.
Yeah, based on the
Based on the-
dollars that go there, change everybody here, that's all.
All right, any discussion on the amendment? Call the roll.
On the amendment.
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Haley.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Clark.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes. All right, any other discussion? Please call the roll, final adoption.
Dyke.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Haley.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Clark.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes. All right, thank you. Next is resolution number 2020-61.
Mr. Mayor, move the reading rule be suspended and resolution number 2020-61 be placed on its first reading.
Discussion on placement, first reading. Please call the roll.
Pat.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Haley.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Clark.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. A resolution authorizing, directing a certain credit to Huron Township for overpayment of Huron Township's fire levy proceeds made to the city of Huron.
So anytime city initiates annexation legislation, as we did 2018 relative to the farm site, the municipality adopts what's called a municipal services arrangement, an agreement. So basically, within that arrangement, it talks about the general city services that are provided to land that's now within the city as part of the annexation. The discussion at the time, the type of annexation used is type 2 expedited, and basically the way that the ORC states that how that operates is the township that the land is being annexed from, the property tax levy stay within the township themselves. So there's a technicality within the way that the agreement was written relative to fire and EMS services. And so as you guys know, we have a joint service agreement with Huron Township. On the strict application of the language within it, it states that the city's fire department will provide city fire and EMS services. And so from a conservative approach, the county auditor applied the tax levy of the city's fire tax levy rather than the township's fire tax levy. And it has been since going back to 2018. It's roughly $8,000 a year. 7,500 roughly. And so, honestly, it wasn't even something that the administration was aware of. Working with Mr. Tapp's office and with the township, made aware that this has been going on now for 2 years, and by the time we were able to put the solution in place here, now 3 years. And so the next 2 pieces of legislation rectify that taxing issue to appropriately apply the township's fire tax levy, not the city's. So it rectifies previous 3 years of collection distribution so that Cora's office has authorization to apply that credit to the previous tax years. And then the next piece of legislation basically authorizes the county auditor to apply the appropriate taxing going forward. My understanding, the county auditor anticipates creating a separate tax district so that the dollars are collected and fully assigned to that parcel number, and they'll handle the accounting going forward, so it's not something that either party will have to worry about. With that, I'll take any questions.
No questions, please call the roll. Final adoption.
Heck,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Hayden,
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Cloud.
Yes.
Next is resolution 2020-62.
Mr. Mayor, move, three reading rule be suspended and resolution number 2020-62 be placed on its first reading.
Any discussion on the placement of first reading? Please call the roll.
Heck,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Hayden,
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Cloud.
Yes.
A resolution amending section 1 of resolution number 2017-80 to clarify and confirm the source of funding for fire protection and emergency medical services pursuant to the municipal state of services contained in resolution 2017-80.
Nothing additional, anyone, any other questions?
Any other discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll. Final adoption.
Heck,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Hayden,
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Cloud.
Yes.
Next is resolution 2020-63. Sorry.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the three reading rule be suspended, resolution number 2020-63 be placed on its first and final reading.
Discussion? Please call the roll.
Hardy,
Yes.
Hayden,
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Cloud.
Yes.
Heck,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Thank you. A resolution authorizing an amendment to the employment agreement between the City of Huron and Michael L. Spafford, the interim city manager.
Couldn't believe how big of a raise you guys gave.
We haven't voted yet.
Oh. No, just again, I appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to the transition. Excited. A lot of good things to come. Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? Please call the roll. Final adoption.
Hardy,
Yes.
Hayden,
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Cloud.
Yes.
Heck,
Yes.
Martino,
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Next is the motion to identify city personnel positions, increased job roles, reassigned due to COVID-19.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion to identify certain city personnel and positions with increased job roles or reassignments due to COVID-19 for proper allocation of salaries and benefits of those personnel to the Coronavirus Relief Fund. Positioned, assigned, additional duties, and percentage of time dedicated to coronavirus-related duties are Parks and Recreation Operations Manager, 25%. Parks and Recreation Programs Manager, 25%. Municipal Grounds Coordinator, 20%. IT Manager, 15%. And Public Health and Safety Employees, 10%.
Thanks, Mr. Crawford. I'll provide a little bit of context and just follow up on the conversation within the work session. Part of the CARES Act funding is to allow ability for covering personnel costs that basically of employees, even if they're previously budgeted expenditures on department-specific operations relative to COVID-19, help both diminish the spread and then also fight any existing outbreak within the community. At this point in time, these are the allocations that we provided based on a pretty lengthy and collaborative discussion with multiple finance directors across Northeast Ohio. These seem to be kind of the general, on the public safety side of things anyways, it seems to be generally accepted at the 10%. It seems to be the number that everyone's been comfortable with. On the others, we haven't had any cities, especially, we joke internally, obviously, a lot of our first 3 or 4 months of this year were relative to fighting COVID-19. We haven't had any cities that we've seen successfully have administrative cost offset, so that's why specifically none of the operations, both Corey's office, my office, are included within this. So our public safety departments obviously were impacted as frontline servers right away. And then from there, IT manager had a pretty substantial amount of time put into getting telework operations, making sure our IT infrastructure was in place to allow for those things. And then with the Parks and Recreation spent the better part of, honestly, this entire year both providing public safe spaces for everyone, keeping the public as clean as possible, modifying and working with the health department on the programming that we did still have to make sure that it was done properly and in accordance with Restart Ohio guidelines. And so basically, what the CARES Act requires is that the chief executive officer of the community basically state this as a proclamation, and then just as a best practice, to give the council for full adoption. But if there are any other questions or anything, I'd be happy to highlight. Again, too, I know these are not additional funding. This is just modifying the back end accounting in terms of the responsible funding for it. Just wanted to get that caveat.
Any questions? Please call the roll.
Thanks.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Davy.
Yes.
All right, next on the agenda is the discussion regarding the road diet or concept for US 6.
Thanks, everyone. So just again, I know we touched on this in the work session, but so everyone at council should have modified exhibits that show what is the concept at a discussion level at this point in time to consider whether or not a reduction of Route 6 from Berlin Road through phase 1, essentially to William Street, on an idea to reduce the amount of lanes down from 2 lanes to 1 lane in either direction with a center turn lane and dedicated bike lanes on either side. I think that this accomplishes a lot of our goals and objectives, especially from a connectability standpoint, providing multimodal connections specifically the east side across to the center of town. As you guys know, from an infrastructure standpoint, we're obviously limited in terms of width of pavement, both at the railroad bridge and the ODOT bridge, and short of a complete rebuild of those, really the only opportunity to provide this type of connectivity from a pedestrian and from a bike path is an option of this nature. So basically what this will do is reclaim that essentially unused pavement that would be realized through the reduction in the amount of lanes, turn that into, I believe on the plan, I don't have dimensions in front of me, but a 6-foot wide bike lane, 9-foot wide buffer area between the bike lane and the lanes of traffic, 12-foot lane traffic, and then a 3-foot center turn lane to help try and obviously realizing how they grow 1 lane and 2 lanes, the ability for cars to get out of travel and to keep traffic moving east and west. Another thing from a safety standpoint that this provides, when we did the initial traffic studies, we found that the average rate of speed through this corridor is 45 miles an hour plus. From a downtown planning perspective, I don't think it's our goal to get people moving through here as fast as possible. I think our goal is to try and encourage people to come here, calm things down, make things safer. And what ODOT's been able to show through multiple years of data accumulation is that road diets generally provide for reduced speeds, change your general concept in terms of place and arrival within the downtown district, and really encourage people to, as they come through, maybe change their mind in terms of whether or not they're going to stay within the community or not. But still for also serve the local traffic to make sure that, in an effort to achieve one thing, you're also still providing safe and passable traffic for all the local residents and businesses. Within this specifically, and touch on the work session, as we look to the scheduling portion of the project, right now, just based on a couple supply chain issues, we are not going to be able to finish the entire project on our initial timeline. We've already started that coordination with the state, don't anticipate any issues there. But what that does, from a planning perspective from the city, is we're not going to have the climate necessary to put down the final striping, which is, think of that thermoplastic, it's that little thick stuff that's kind of raised up off the street and kind of melted right onto the road surface. And so what that'll do is we'll end up doing what's called temporary striping, which is just your typical street paint. Just doesn't have the longevity. So right now the plan is, assuming council were to make the change, is to continue on as a path forward with 4-lane proposal. We would do the temporary striping following that plan. And basically, I guess the administration's ask and request for consideration of council is, can we look to create essentially an infield trial practice, a practice run, basically an opportunity. It's one thing to look at a rendering, it's one thing to look at a video rendering of how something would work, but really until you've had the chance to fully experience it and not experience it in the way that it's been laid out now. But I mean, an actual opportunity without construction equipment, without orange barrels everywhere, a real opportunity to see how the traffic flows throughout there. could we look to essentially utilize it from the time final asphalt's laid later this fall to some date certain next spring, early summer, as an opportunity to have the road data plan in place to give people an opportunity to experience it for real. Collect some data, get feedback, and council can make the final determination next spring in terms of what the final stripe is going to be. With that, I know Russ has also prepared some comments and things, and then if there are any other questions, happy to address them. One thing too, just to note before I forget, the island specifically is one thing at it's the pedestrian refuge island at the intersection of Berlin Road and 6. We have received a lot of commentary on just the geometry of how that turn radius is going to work. We have worked with the contractor. We're going to reduce that down both from a length standpoint, but also from a width standpoint. Still feel that it meets the pedestrian safety requirements for PEDs as a refuge island, so there's still plenty of space to be able to stop in the middle of those lanes. What the other thing is too, we'll modify the curve from that hard stop 6-inch flat curve, square curve, to a more of a 4-inch rolled curve that you typically see on the roundabout, just in the event that as larger vehicles, semi-trucks, boat trailers, making that turn, that in the event they flip that island just a little bit, it's not going to damage the island, it's not going to damage the vehicle. Obviously, we encourage people to stay in the road as much as possible, but realizing it happens. Yes?
Hey, Russ, if we end up doing this and when we get to permanent striping next year, and if we decide to go back to 2 lanes, how jacked up is that going to be from the temporary lines being there? Is there a way to get rid of the temporary lines, or is it going to be painted right over the? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, we went over this issue and with the contractor. Unfortunately, you do have that shadowing that I think is pretty unavoidable.
Is it just shadowing, or did they literally paint black over the old lines?
No, they ground it out.
Oh, okay. But it's just shadowing, it's not the actual line?
Yeah, it's not the actual
Okay.
And one of the things we did talk about too, in the event we go this way, realizing that's a potential outcome, to do as minimal striping as part of the temporary striping as possible. So not doing the full, there's hash marks shown throughout there, so just doing what's safe from a minimum standpoint, but it wouldn't be a full demarcation in the event that happens. We obviously don't want hash marks all over the asphalt.
And council, thank you. The only thing I wanted to offer is the exhibit that we presented is something that was previously generated, and I heard some comments through the work session, of course, relative to, we'll be, of course, studying this if it goes forward with a trial in a sense, evaluating storage lines and so forth for returning vehicles, turn lanes, and all that is determined, of course, on volumes of traffic, speed, types of traffic, cycles of this intersection. So there's some data collection to be done to finalize the actual, final pavement markings, if you will, and conditions. So this exhibit is something that was really brought forward from that previous, I think it was 2018 or whatever the timeline. And as Mayor, as you mentioned, developing some criteria so that at the end of the day, council and the community can say, yes, this worked or did not work, and so forth. So we'll be glad to provide our professional services from that end. So that's all I wanted to offer.
Russ, I know you guys are going to do this because you said this is an older layout, and Mr. Dyke wrote out. I mean, even when I look at this, and I go back to, I'm more concerned with the safety part of it, especially these side streets that come in, just the layout, and even though this is an older one, I know it still exists today, coming out of Huron Street. A car has a hard time staying with the business that's there because they have cars lined up. And the way you have to sit back, I think it's even more dangerous with my. So I guess that's something to look at as far as how to fix that.
Yeah, in any public right-of-way, there's site distance that we have control of it, in other words, and we don't have control of it. So within public right-of-way, those site distance lines are meant to stay clear. In other words, whether they're physical obstructions or temporary, that is the right-of-way is the obligation of creating safe infrastructure that way.
Russ, could you clarify what typically the the width of the bike lane and the barrier lane would be most likely?
Well, we have this laid out, it's 6-foot bike lane and a 3-foot buffer.
Okay. I couldn't read it on here.
Yeah.
Is the buffer on the sidewalk side or on the road?
No, it's on the road, between the bike lane and the travel.
The white,
Yeah.
and in a final, I mean, is this fairly representative of how many hash marks there would be, or would there be a lot more than this in that buffer?
No, that's pretty close. And again, I did hear a comment there on, the weights of the pavement markings, et cetera. Those are all pretty much dictated with the criteria or the guidelines that are established by Ohio manual uniform traffic control devices, basically. So everything will be per guidelines, of course.
And my only other comment would be that, I think Mr. Dyke mentioned earlier, is to, go forward, the stack up at River Road because of the boat trailer thing would definitely need to be brought into consideration, because it may not automatically come into consideration if someone's not realizing that that's what's happening there.
Right, and we'll be glad to collect some real data and, of course.
So the separation is all through striping, there's no physical reflector things that flop around?
We did discuss that and, within the leadership here and with our internal design team. There are options out there. They create other issues, but they can be considered.
But as it sits right now, the proposed separation is just
a straight buffer, correct.
Nothing's sticking up, it's all on the asphalt.
That's correct.
All right, before we go any further, we need the clerk to please read the communications.
Okay, our first comment I received is from Timothy Armstrong. I enthusiastically support bike lanes on Cleveland Road. The addition of bike lanes will vastly improve bike rider safety with minimal or no impact on drivers. I regularly bike from Old Homestead to town and look forward to this modernization of our roads. Next is Mary Pisano. We do not need a bike lane on the main highway. This will only put more stress for those who need to get used to the new roadways now. Also, we do not get that much bike traffic to constitute a lane for that use only. Thank you. Dan Downs. Hi Terry, we own a house in Homestead 2 and our bike riders. It is so inconvenient for bikers and walkers to have to cross the bridge on the sidewalk, not to mention dangerous. When our grandchildren come to visit, we love to ride bikes with them to the donut shop and the pier. Huron has so much to offer. Hopefully we can take full advantage of it with bike lanes. I don't see any negatives. We are 100% for it. Next is Carrie Van Auker. We have a house on Miami Place. I am totally in favor of the idea to 3-lane Cleveland Road from Berlin Road West to accommodate bike lanes, as long as the turning lane remains. Thank you. Next is Bonnie Schlegel. I am in favor of the proposed bike lanes. We enjoy biking as a family and have had some hazardous outings and 2 actual falls. Thanks for considering this. Bonnie Schlegel, Old Homestead 2. Next is from Bill Downs, 312 Shawnee Place. Good afternoon, Terry. I am ready to express my support for the inclusion of bike lanes on the Route 6 bridge project. My wife and I are avid bicyclists and can speak from personal experience. Reason number 1 is dangerous now. My question to many people in opposition is, have you ever ridden a bike across the bridge? Not on the sidewalk, but on the road where bikes are supposed to be. I have, and it's very scary and dangerous. I've had cars squeeze by my side by side in each lane where I could have reached out and touched the car beside me. Reason number 2, reduce parking congestion downtown. We have a home in Old Homestead 2 and would rather bike downtown for events, but with 7 and 9-year-old grandchildren, we will drive instead. If there was a safe bike lane, we would definitely bike. When you consider the number of vacationers that stay in our neighborhood, how nice would it be to have them bike downtown rather than drive? Reason number 3, be forward thinking. All major cities are working towards being bike friendly. Why not Huron as well? Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my
Bonnie Litz. Please vote yes for the road diet at Route 6 and Berlin Road. Cutting down the number of lanes will give us a fighting chance of getting out of Berlin Road. It's hard for everyone to get onto Route 6 from Berlin Road. As one gets older, it gets near impossible. Also, what about moms and grandmas picking up kids after school? Kids do weird, distracting things in the back seat. Add that to a 4-lane intersection and you've got a highway to hell. I didn't pre-read it. Put Route 6 on a diet. Okay, next is from Denny Belkett. Has experienced during construction over the past few months, utilizing 2 lanes versus 4 lanes does not hamper transportation on US 6. If anything, the 1 lane each way has channeled the flow of traffic, preventing auto swerving from lane to lane for either speed reasons or vehicles making turns off Route 6. An advantage of consistent speed was evident as it prevented vehicles from switching lane to lane to exceed the speed limit. The question should be answered as to whether a small community of this size is in need of a major 4-lane highway through the middle of town, or would we rather keep this a quaint small-town atmosphere with biking and ample walking opportunities to visit all parts of town without jumping into the car constantly? I am in favor of keeping with the 3-lane traffic configuration and adding bike lanes. Currently, without bike lanes, it is very hazardous to ride bikes east and west, especially over the bridge, which is extremely hazardous due to the elevation change between the railroad bridge and sidewalk. The railroad bridge sidewalk is extremely narrow and does not allow adequate open paths for biking. To use the highway for biking over the bridge currently pins bikers against the wall and narrows where the path is. With the eventuality of someday development of the Conagra area, it would be great to elevate our livability ranking to entice the types of residents and visitors that enjoy the outdoors and will take advantage of biking and walking to all areas of our great little community. With continued growth and use of Nickel Plate Beach, biking from the western parts of Huron should be an ideal mode for all. The cost risk is minor to go the direction of bike lanes at this time. If for any reason it would be desired to revert back in the future, the only cost of restriping. Most progressive communities of all sizes are currently looking to improve walkability and biking to improve the ability to satisfy exercise and transportation desires of families. We have the opportunity in Huron to easily move in that direction with the Highway 6 completion. I do ride a bike and walk all over town and encourage more to do the same. Next is from Caitlin Sharp. I think Huron bike lanes are a fantastic idea. They would be well used and would build community and promote a healthy lifestyle and environmental awareness. I would be in favor of the longest length of bike lanes possible. Thank you. Next is Michael McDevitt. I am an 86-year-old male, and for the past 20 years I have ridden on my bike on an almost daily basis year-round from Homestead 2 on US 6 to get to town. Enjoying riding by the Lighthouse Lakefront Park and the high school and connecting with the bike lane along US 6 to ride each way. I think having this bike lane will make this ride safer and will cut down some of the frustrations some drivers may have with driving so close to bikers on this route. On my bike, I observe drivers sometimes slowing down or drifting into or changing to the other lane as they approach, which could cause somewhat of a hazard. I encourage council to proceed with the plans for the proposed bike lane on US 6. One other note, I appreciate the Huron police assuring that the speed limits are observed along this route. Thank you for your consideration. Next is Margaret Wilmhoff. What I am noticing is that the traffic is seeming to accelerate the speed coming down the hill. When pulling out of Drug Mart today, both cars I was waiting to pass seemed to be speeding down the hill from the bridge. I believe having the bike lane will cause traffic to be more concentrated and the traffic is going faster than normal because there is no anticipation of a stop. I cross Route 6 often and I think it will be more dangerous. Next is from William Billcombe. I'd like to first comment about the road diet. I have been in favor of this concept since it was first shown to the public. Not only am I an avid biker and would enjoy the safety of bike lanes, but also I can see where the road diet would help make traffic flow better and safer. When the road was first stretched in its has been reduced to mainly local traffic. Since then, the state has labeled the light at Berlin Road and Cleveland Road unnecessary and slated it for removal due to lack of sufficient traffic to justify a signal. So it's only logical to follow suit with the lane markings. Only the section of Cleveland Road that was used to bypass traffic has ever been a 4-lane road within the city. And traffic gets through the rest of the city just fine with 2-lane road configurations. Cleveland Road will be easier to maneuver with a center turn lane, allowing traffic turning into, for example, the boat ramp, easier and safer without obstruction of through traffic. This will also make it safer for through traffic because now you won't have people following left turn people darting into the right lane to go around as they wait to turn left. For people turning from Berlin, Commerce Plaza, the boat ramp, River Road, etc., you will now only have to turn across 2 lanes of traffic instead of 4, making turns onto Cleveland Road safer and easier. And this should also help keep traffic flow closer to the speed limit, which has been an issue on this stretch of road in the past. And finally, it will be a lot safer for people to cross the street since they will only have to deal with 2 lanes instead of 4. And especially in the summer, we have a lot of bike and pedestrian traffic. This would be hugely beneficial. I know people are afraid of change, I understand that, but this really wouldn't be a big adjustment. Think of it as going back to how it would have been before the stretch of road was altered to accommodate Cedar Point traffic. We've been living with a 2-lane road situation for the last few months as the road construction has already created a road diet and it's worked well. If you try it and it doesn't work, the beauty is we can always go back, but if you never try, you'll never know. I, for one, have not experienced any issues or delays with the current 2-lane road situation from the construction, and I drive that stretch of road multiple times daily. That's it.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Clerk. So basically, one other thing is that we talked about this, we'd love to have a public session, open session, and invite the whole city here. Obviously, because of COVID, we can't do that. So that's one other reason why we thought about this idea to actually stripe and let people see what it looks like and actually physically use it. See. So is there any other discussion? You need a motion?
Yeah, I think just to make sure we have the direction of council, I'd appreciate a motion if you're willing to do so tonight.
I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor. Go ahead, Mike.
I make a motion to put the road diet into place, temporary striping with bike lanes as identified and to be further studied by OHM.
Any discussion?
Can we put a time frame on this? So,
Sure.
I know we said now it's spring, so it's not going to be that way anyway.
Sure. Yeah. So what's a
Part of that's weather related. That's the
Yeah.
other part, temperature related to the current climate.
No later than June?
Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that'd be,
May 30th or something?
yeah. It's usually sometimes in May.
Coordinate with
we
county.
do it for striping.
I think we definitely want to get into the spring, we'll start to see a lot of boat traffic then. And we'll have a better idea.
Yeah, we can see them.
So you're saying May 31st or May, June 1st?
Yeah.
No later than June.
By June 1st, we ought to be able to do the final striping, regardless of your decision yet.
So then amend the motion to have the permanent solution identified and corrected by June 1st of 2021.
And, Mr. Patelli will have a criteria, probably within 2 weeks or 4 weeks or something.
Yeah, we'll develop something in the draft and put it in front of the city for review.
When do we anticipate that they would do this striping?
It's not, we're gonna,
By end of October.
Oh,
yeah,
still a little bit of bike.
yeah.
Also,
Any other discussion? Please call Call the roll on the motion.
Klaus?
Yes.
Cap? Martino?
Yes.
Dyke?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Peggy?
Yes.
Crawford?
Yes.
All right, thank you, everybody. City manager discussion?
I think for the benefit of tonight, we've covered quite a bit. I'll answer an activity report for you guys on Friday and just entertain any questions. If anything's come up or anything, you can answer tonight. If not, you guys always know how to go over.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys.
All right, as far as anything from me, I know we still have some work to do tonight, but I would like to take this time to thank our citizens that volunteered to work with us on the city manager search committee. Dr. Stephanie Walls, Mr. David Clark, and Mr. Scott Slocum, thank you very much for your involvement, your knowledge, and your expertise. It was very valuable to this process. I'd also like to thank Dr. Walls for her facilitation skills. She kept us on track and got us where we needed to be. So that's all I have. For the good of the order, Mr. Hart.
Yeah, just a second, what the mayor said, I think the process was very efficient, it was timely, and I think everyone did a great job, and I was proud to be part of the process there. It was something that went really well, so that's all.
Nothing, thank you.
I appreciate the search committee. Again, feedback, they did a great job. Looking forward to the future. That's all I got.
I would just like to add a thank you to staff and Latanic for getting the ladder project completed on the pier finally, so just in time for summer. But no, they look great, and I passed by it on the river frequently, so thank you.
All right, Mr. Crawford.
I just want to ask for continued patience from the community as we wrap up this Route 6 project. I realize it's dusty and frustrating at times, but it's really going to be nice when it's finished.
I'll pile on. I want to say thanks to the entire selection committee, to include Joe, Trey, the mayor, and all of you that helped. It was really, really outstanding job. We had some absolutely outstanding candidates. You had a lot of competition there, Matt. No, thank you. Really, really first-rate job. That's all I had.
Can I point out one other thing? Ms. Weltner, thank you very much for all of your help in that regard. And also Mike Spafford, you were a class act during this whole period, so thank you for that.
All right, we will be going into an executive session. There will be legislation taken up afterwards. So I need a motion to go to executive session to consider appointment, employment compensation in terms of and conditions of employment for the prospective employee.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Taylor.
Move to go into executive session to consider the appointment, employment compensation in terms and conditions of employment for a prospective employee. And I would also like to invite Mr. Ebert, Ms. Leonard, and Mr. Spafford.
All right, any questions, any discussion? Please call the roll.
Cap?
Yes.
Martino?
Yes.
Dyke?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Peggy?
Yes.
Crawford?
Yes.
Klaus?
Yes.
Thank you. We will be going into executive session and then we will, they said we're going anywhere. Session at 8:14 p.m.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to suspend the three reading rule and place ordinance number 2020-28 on its final reading.
Discussion on suspending the three reading. Please call the roll.
Hardy.
Yes.
Hagee.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus.
Yes.
Heck.
Yes.
Martino. Dyke.
Yes. Yes. Mr. Longenecker?
Yes, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter an employment agreement between the city of Huron and Matthew Lasco as city manager declaring an emergency.
Mr. Mayor, I move that ordinance 2020-28 be placed as an emergency measure.
Any discussion on the emergency? Please call the roll.
Hardy.
Yes.
Hagee.
An emphatic yes.
Crawford.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Klaus.
Yes.
Heck.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
All right.
We're good.
Congratulations.
That was just the emergency.
Wait,
We have to take the vote on the motion.
On the right.
With the reason?
You read that?
Vote on the motion,
Any
please.
discussion?
Please call the roll.
Hardy.
Yes.
Hagee.
Once again, emphatic yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus.
Yes.
Heck.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes.
Dyke.
Yes.
Before we close, I would like to say, Mike, you're one hell of a man. I appreciate, I know Mike worked with Todd and myself some long hours there for a few days, and appreciate it. So with that, if nothing else, motion to adjourn.
I can make a motion to adjourn.
Roll call, please.
Dyke.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Hagee.
Yes.
Crawford.
Yes.
Klaus.
Yes.
Heck.
Yes.
Martino.
Yes. Thank you.
Congratulations, I've never met you.
Thank you, Matt.
I